It's exactly 2 after 10 o'clock, our final interview for the morning, and we are going to now talk with Reezwana Sumad. She's an economist, and we've been informed that Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana says that government debt is projected to be more than 4.7 trillion in the current financial year, compared to 627 billion in 2008-2009, and that indeed is very, very worrying. Reezwana Sumad, Assalamu alaikum to you. Welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me.
How worried should we be about this issue? It's really, it comes down to ordinary taxpayers like you and I that's going to foot this bill, isn't it?
Definitely. So our debt load has grown quite substantially over the past 20 years because of spending commitments and spending growth that has increased, and we haven't seen much revenue come in to match that. Ultimately, we've seen debt grow, and the problem with debt is that it comes at a cost in terms of interest repayments, and that has been ballooning over the last few years. And the problem from a budgeting perspective is that whereas if we had a lesser debt and a smaller interest repayment, we could use that funds elsewhere in terms of spending on other infrastructure or social commitments. So that is a key concern, that as the debt load grows, it will essentially crowd out spending else in other areas.
I also understand that the global economy is slowing, obviously, as we're all aware. Inflation is increasing, and the financial markets are becoming more volatile. The result is that the debt service costs are estimated to be 5.9 billion higher in 2022 and 2023 than we thought at the time of the February budget. How do you think government is going to close that gap?
Yeah, so they have done a lot in the past year or so. They've received a large tax revenue overshoots. They've had overruns in tax revenue collection purely as a result of higher commodity prices and better revenue collection from the financial services, the manufacturing and mining industries. So for now, they seem to be in a bit of a comfortable space whereby tax revenue collection has beat their initial estimates, and they are now able to fulfill a lot of the debt obligations. But the big problem, I think, over the longer term, so over the next 3 to 5 years, is that government is planning to take on the debt of Eskom and potentially even other state-owned enterprises, and that will result in a much larger debt stock for the government over the years ahead, even though government strategy is actually to reduce its debt load. So we haven't really seen a reduction in the debt trajectory. We've seen it move in the opposite direction, and the worrying thing is it's likely to get worse. Another thing to note is that whereby government can budget for expenditures across the socio-economic categories. One thing that is very uncertain during volatile financial conditions is interest costs. So interest costs will fluctuate as inflation and global interest rates fluctuate, and that is a key uncertainty and a key danger from a budgeting perspective.
Okay, there is also the possibility of a major price correction in financial markets. And how risky is that? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so it is quite risky. What we have had over the past year or so is rising inflation rates, and while that has had negative connotations in terms of the cost of living, what it had done is that it boosted our rand value of our GDP, essentially the size of our economy. We are likely to see that price correction over the next year, and that likely to result in a smaller nominal GDP size of the economy as opposed to what we have been previously forecasting. However, there are other dangers that's lurking from a global economic landscape perspective. The global economy, as you said, Julie, is slowing quite rapidly in 2023. The IMF and the World Bank have warned recently that it's the first time in many decades that global growth is slowing and South Africa's growth is also slowing, but inflation and interest rates remain very elevated. We have never seen this synchronized global slowdown combined with high inflation and high interest rates. So essentially a stagflationary environment. And that presents risks because essentially people in the economy, businesses, and for most people in financial markets and financial services, they've never been presented with this type of market volatility before. And so it's something new that businesses and financial market workers will have to sort of contend with and deal with.
You said something very worrying early on. You spoke about government taking over Eskom's debt. How are they going to service that? Where does that leave the ordinary man in the street? What does it also say about, the cost of electricity? And added to that, the high unemployment rate in the country. So we are really, we're really dealing with lots more than other countries around the world. We are in almost what might sound like, I don't want to be an alarmist, but we sound like we're in a very, very risky situation.
Yeah, the finance minister has indicated that the way that they intend to service or be able to afford Eskom debt is by reprioritizing spending elsewhere. So cutting spending elsewhere in the budget, and this is, what I started off saying is that once our debt load begins to grow, our interest cost on that debt grows, and our interest costs are already the second fastest growing line item in the budget from an expenditure perspective. You're going to see other areas of spending have to unfortunately be cut to be able to accommodate and be able to afford growing debt and growing interest costs. For example, if you look at our debt service costs, it's well over 300 billion rands per annum. Like I said, second fastest growing expenditure item. And if you look at social grants, so, we spend about 250 billion rand on social grants per annum. So our interest costs is substantially more than what we spend on social grants, and so that is the crowding out effect that I say. As our debt and interest costs grow, we will have to cut spending elsewhere to be able to accommodate this larger debt load. In
Okay, I
terms
want.
of electricity tariffs, you've mentioned how costly it is already. Next year, Eskom has applied to NERSA for a 33% tariff hike, and so that's still being decided or deliberated upon. But there is definitely upside risk to the cost of living, to inflation, emanating from electricity and other administered costs, including fuel. And so inflation will likely remain quite elevated into 2023 as well on the back of these upside risks. So people, the man on the street, will likely be squeezed and will have to budget, much more cleverly next year on the back of both the slowdown in the economy and high interest and high inflation rates.
Is there any good news at all in the story that you're sharing with me, just to give hope to the poor man in the street?
Yeah, so the one aspect that we know National Treasury is sort of holding its guard on is against tax increases. Our tax rates have risen, over the last 5 to 6 years or so, and National Treasury is almost against increasing tax rates over the medium term. So I think that that's something that people would take quite positively. The other aspect is that the government has received this large, tax boon. They've collected much higher tax revenue relative to what they were expecting for this year, and expected over the next 2 to 3 years as well. And they're using at least 45% of that tax over collection or overshoot to be able to reduce their borrowing requirements. So they debt, the amount that they borrow each year to be able to finance finance the budget. So that is positive. There are green shoots here and there in the budget that National Treasury, the government itself, is trying to actually clamp down and in terms of our debt load and be able to safeguard people and taxpayers by not raising tax rates. Another positive is that the Social Relief of Distress Grant has been extended to March of 2024, and there are a lot of really poverty-stricken households that benefit from that. One can argue, okay, they need more, and others can argue that how are we going to afford the grant on either side of the debate. But the fact of the matter is that grant is there, it's been extended, and it will possibly be extended even further out. So those are some of the positives emanating from the budget that people, taxpayers, are essentially safeguarded in that respect.
And I guess the social grant situation won't lessen at all unless employment is created for the youth. So fingers crossed that things do ease up, and hopefully that the government stops looting all of the money so that we don't find ourselves in the situation that we find ourselves currently. But here's making dua that things do improve going forward. Reezwana
Inshallah.
Sumad, economist, talking to us about this issue on economics. Really enjoyed talking with you this morning. You go well, and salam alaikum to you.
Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me.
And that's where we leave it today. Thank you indeed for being with me on the show this morning. Yeah, we had a bit of a slow start. I don't know if it was the weather, whether it was Eskom, whether it was the phone lines. But alhamdulillah, we managed to pick up pace, around about 8:30 this morning. And shukr, we do hope you enjoyed the rest of the show right here on News and Views. A big thank you to our production team, and that's you, Kolani and Nasreen. From me till next week, Monday morning, the same time as always. Stay safe. Assalamu alaikum and Khudafiz.